Karl Piepenburg was born on January 19, 1844, the son of Michael Piepenburg and Caroline Emert. He was born in or around Leibs-Regenwalde in Pomerania, which is now Lobez, Poland, and located in northwest Poland. We do not know anything about Michael and Caroline, and we do not know how many brothers and sisters Karl had altogether, but we do know of the 4 siblings that came to the United States. Karl's older sister, Caroline Piepenburg, was born May 28, 1836, and 7 years older than Karl. She married August Lorenz, who was an operator of a brickyard in Leibs. They came to the United States with their son William and settled in Grant Park, Illinois. The 1870 census lists August's job as a day laborer. Their son William lived to adulthood, married his cousin Bertha Lorenz, and worked on the railroad, eventually becoming an engineer, and then a road supervisor at the railroad yard in Dalton, Illinois, just south of Chicago. William had 4 children, Edward, who became a pastor, and the girls Rosa, Olga, and Greta, who all taught school. Olga was a teacher her whole life in Chicago, and Rosa and Greta later married and became homemakers. Wilhelm Piepenburg, brother to Karl, was born about 1850 when Karl was about 5 years old, and served in the Prussian army, and came to the United States in December of 1872 at 22 years of age. 4 years later, he became a citizen in 1876, as recorded in the Kankakee County record, but died before 1880 from obstruction of the bowel. Later, the family thought his death could have been caused by a ruptured appendix. Karl's sister, Frederica Albertina Piepenburg, was born February 13, 1856. She was married 3 times, losing each husband in death, and had 1 son, Richard Peterson. She lived in Danville, Illinois, south of Grant Park in Vermilion County. Karl and his brother Wilhelm both served in the Prussian army. Ruth Domingo relates the story her grandfather told her about the war. He said he and 2 other German soldiers were being pursued by the French soldiers in French territory. The Germans were hurriedly looking for the closest place in sight for cover. It was an old barn in which the haymow was filled with dry, new-mown hay. They hoped their tracks could not be seen here because the hay had not settled yet. As they burrowed themselves well into the hay, they heard the men coming. Pitchforks were thrust into the mounds of hay at close intervals, in tune with the vicious curses of the Franzosen. By the grace of God, they never did find grandfather or his partner. The 3rd German was taken prisoner without revealing their whereabouts. As a result of his years in the Prussian army, Karl lost some of his hearing as he was assigned to loading and shooting cannons. When Karl was on leave from the army in January 1869, he left for America, sponsored by a wagon maker in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He stayed in Allentown as a wagon maker apprentice at least 3 years. He was paid $6 a week. $5 went for his room and board, and the other $1 was saved. When he finished his apprenticeship, he left to open a wagon shop with a partner in Grant Park, Illinois, where he joined his sister Caroline Lorenz and her family, and his brother Wilhelm. There he went into the wagon maker business with a partner. The family story is that Karl's Grant Park business partner was a swindler, so he quit the partnership and went into business for himself. Across the street from his shop or his home lived a young lady, Maria Heimsoth, who soon became his wife.
Katharina Maria Heimsoth and her 3 siblings, Johann Heinrich, Johann Diedrich, and Katharina Sophia, were born to Johann Heinrich Heimsoth and Catherine Maria Kruse. Maria Heimsoth was born on February 25, 1847, in Hohenafferbergen, Lower Saxony, near Verden. Hohen means high, and this village is located on a small rise of land rising out of the Aller River Valley. Maria's father, Johann, a farmer, was 35, and her mother, Marie, was 29 when Maria was born. Her mother was her father's second wife. His first wife and the 2 children born to the first marriage died before he married Marie, according to St. Andreas church records in Verden. The Heimsoth family's birth records, baptismal records, and death records are all recorded in the St. Andreas church books. In fact, the baptismal font where the Heimsoth family members were baptized is still in the Verden church today. The Heimsoth family emigrated to the United States and arrived in New York on August 15, 1853. Later in life, Marie and her husband Carl would talk about their trips across the Atlantic, which lasted more than 3 months. They shuddered when they told about the mice and rat-infested holds of the ships and never-ending fight with the lice. There were no fresh foods or fruits, just slabs of bacon in brine, potatoes to be cooked, water rationed, and the food situation abominable by the end of the voyage. The family made their way to Elk Grove, Illinois, west of Chicago, where Johann's brother and other people from the home district had settled. 3 months later, in December, Maria's mother, Marie, died. Maria's father remarried, and then 4 years later, he also passed away on November 14, 1857, because of a farm accident. Maria's stepmother married again to a shoe repairman. While still living with her stepmother in 1861, Maria was confirmed at St. John in Bensonville, Illinois, a community next to Elk Grove. Because Maria and her stepmother did not get along, Maria left the household and worked out helping other families in return for her room and board. Maria's brothers and sister are found in the 1880 census living south of Chicago, with and among their mother's Cruzy relatives in Madison, Illinois. This may be how Maria made her way down to Grant Park, which is about 30 miles south of Madison, and started working for a Grant Park family as a maid. Just so happens she came to live across the street from Carl Piepenburg's house. Maria and Carl married on May 25, 1874 in Grant Park. 4 children were born to the couple in Illinois. Rosa Marie in 1875, William Henry in 1877, Eliza A. in 1879, and Charles William in 1881. By this time, Carl's wagon business in Grant Park starts to wane, and because Carl was interested in the wheat fields of Minnesota, he and Maria moved their family to Lakefield, Minnesota, in the southwestern part of Minnesota. Here, Carl farmed, and 2 more children were added to the family, Emma Catherine in 1884 and Albert August in 1887. The family had little money because they had bought their own farm. Eliza later told her daughter Alice the following story about the Lakefield home. The home they settled in at first was quite small and meager. The time came when their kitchen was in need of papering. Since money was so scarce, instead of buying wallpaper, they used clean newspapers for wallpaper. There was a picture of a Barrett Rock rooster in the newspaper, a large one. They took great care to paste this right above their stove in the kitchen. Rosa's daughter, Mabel Podratz, later told this story about her mother and uncle when living in Lakefield. When Carl and Maria's children were growing up, they had to board their children if they wanted them instructed and confirmed in the Lutheran faith. William Piepenburg and my mother Rosa lived with their parents 6 miles south of Lakefield, and the church was 6 miles north of Lakefield. So they stayed with the same family for a year or so. After being with their host family for a length of time, they became very homesick. One time, when they were granted a vacation from school, they decided to walk home. And they did, 12 miles. William was younger and tired more easily, but his determination won out. The family then moved around 1905 to Horton Township in Stevens County, Minnesota. The Piepenburg book states that Carl and Maria wanted to move to the Horton area to live close to their grandchildren, as their 2 oldest daughters were married to farmers and living in Horton Township. Carl also was looking for more land for himself and his 3 sons.
Carl and Maria's first child, Rosa, was married to William Bill Podratz. Rosa's husband, Bill Podratz, had immigrated with his family to the United States in 1886 when he was about 13 years old. We don't know how Rosa and her sister Eliza met their future husbands because they both married husbands who lived in Stevens County and moved to Horton Township in Stevens County before the rest of the family. Rosa and Bill were married back home in Jackson County, but then farmed in Horton Township, about 9 miles south of Morris on Highway 59. Bill and Rosa had 4 children, William, Mabel, Herbert, and Clara. Mabel, Clara, and Herb lived in Horton Township and were an important part of the Zion Lutheran Church community. Carl and Maria's oldest son, William, never married and farmed with his father and brothers in Horton. Ruth Domingo said of her uncle, "Uncle Bill was special to all of his nephews and nieces. He was the first in the township to purchase a new Model T Ford with side curtains in 1914. He was also an early-day photographer who set up his own darkroom and did all of his own picture developing. Bill had many horses which he loved and treated well. Ruth said, "We used to say that when Uncle Bill talked to his horses, they talked back." In 1923, Uncle Bill, his brother Albert, and a neighbor, Tim McCarthy, bought their own threshing rig, including a mogul tractor and a case threshing machine separator, complete with all belting, for $1,000, and threshed for themselves and their neighbors. Eliza Piepenburg, the third Piepenburg sibling, married Henry Moore, also a farmer in Horton Township. They had 9 children: Albert, Clara, Lydia, Alice, Irene, Ida, William, Walter, and Carl. 3 of their children did not live to adulthood. Clara, their second child, died as an infant in 1904. Albert, the oldest, and Walter, the youngest, at the time both died in the 1918 flu epidemic. Grandpa Piepenburg, Albert, commented that there was no funeral for the 2 children, and the house was quarantined. He helped dig the graves for the 2 children. The fourth sibling, Charles Piepenburg, also never married. He and his brothers came to Horton Township to farm with their father the spring of 1903 from Jackson County in Minnesota. In 1912, at the age of 30, Charles loaded and unloaded a wagon with gravel during a very cold day in November. Ruth Domingo said he sweat profusely while doing the job, and on the way home he noticed chills overtaking him. He developed pneumonia, then brain fever, and it took him into death. The fifth Piepenburg, Emma, was nice-looking and always a very well-dressed young lady. And even though she had suitors earlier in her life, Emma Piepenburg never married by choice and took care of her parents. Later, she lived with her brother Bill. According to the Piepenburg book, she bore the brunt of getting the baking done, the house cleaned, and the meat prepared for the Christmas gathering of the Piepenburgs, Moores, and Podratses when her mother was still alive. Coffee cake, pies, breads, and cookies were all part of the occasion. And that brings us to the youngest Piepenburg sibling, Albert. How does one describe our grandfather, who had such an important role in our life? The earlier pictures show a young man with a twinkle in his eyes, so we can well imagine that there were a few pranks pulled in his early days. Albert, along with his brothers, hunted prairie chickens, ducks, and geese. Pictures show abundant hunting trophies in those days. The brothers also trapped animals such as foxes, wolves, badgers, skunks, weasels, minks, and beavers in order to sell or trade with the animals' furs. For entertainment, Albert played on the Horton and Sinez baseball teams. He also courted on the organ along with his buddies and brother, who played violins and accordions. Most importantly, he farmed, alongside his brothers and father, and later with his son-in-law. Important to our history, the pastor of the Horton Church, Reverend Paschke, invited Albert to play chess with him regularly. Albert accepted the invitations, but his real intention had to do with a young 16-year-old girl, Reverend Paschke's daughter, Frida.
Frida Clara Regina Paschke was born in Butte, Nebraska in 1896, the first child of Friedrich Paschke and Martha Wiedenhoff. Her father was born in Breyersburg, Brandenburg, between Berlin and the Oder River. The Paschke family immigrated here in 1881 and lived in Mayville, Wisconsin before coming to Good Thunder, Minnesota. Friedrich met Martha when visiting his family on vacation from the St. Louis Seminary. Martha was born in Good Thunder and often worked in her family store. Friedrich and Martha married and traveled to Butte, the place of Reverend Paschy's first call. The family later moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, then Webster, South Dakota, and finally to Stevens County just before 1910, where he served several small congregations and lived in the parsonage by Zion Lutheran Church in Horton Township. Besides Frida, the couple had 11 children, including Ted, Gertrude, Esther, Paul, Fred, Walter, Art, Reuben, Carl, and Martin. A 13th child named after 3 of the sons-in-law, Edward Albert George, lived just 3 days. Frida loved her siblings and often talked lovingly of them. Frida, being the oldest of 12 siblings, helped her mother with the household chores. She was not so fond of washing the wooden floors in the parsonage. Frida also played the organ at church before she was married. One of her favorite activities was to visit her grandparents and aunts and uncles in Good Thunder, Minnesota. She liked to write and kept many of the postcards she received back from her friends and relatives. She kept journals of her daily activities for many years. Albert and Frida were married on February 11, 1915, by her father. The Piepenburg book stated that Frida wore a lovely white satin gown, which great-grandmother Martha had ordered for Frida from a mail order house. That gown still exists. The newly married couple stayed with her parents and family for about a week or so. By that time, the stove, table, and 6 chairs had arrived to set them up in housekeeping. These were wedding gifts from Albert's parents. His father also gave him $100. In those days, that was a very tidy sum, and helped them through the first year of marriage, until they harvested a crop of their own. They made their home on the west half of Section 19, northwest corner, on the first farm Carl purchased, where the Lawrence family had lived. Their first house was a small house with 2 rooms upstairs and 2 downstairs. Downstairs, the house contained the kitchen and a living room. In the kitchen, a pantry was located under the stairway leading to the upstairs. Grandma had a big black Kalamazoo stove and a special cabinet with glass doors to store dishes and kitchen supplies. This house was replaced by a larger house in 1928, just before the stock market fell. The good Lord blessed Albert and Frida with 5 daughters: Ruth, Frida, Regina in 1916, Dorothea Esther in 1918, Helen Marie in 1921, Lois Gertrude in 1924, and Marion Jean in 1930.
The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. But when I woke, dear, I was mistaken. So I hung my head and cried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. So please don't take my sunshine away. I'll always love you and make you happy if you will only stay the same. If you leave me and love another, then you'll regret it all someday. My sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. So please don't take my sunshine away.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper time. Be my little sugar and love me all the time. Honey in the morning, honey in the evening, honey at supper time. So be my little honey and love me all the time. Put your arms around me and swear by stars above, you'll be mine forever in a heaven of love. Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening. evening, sugar at supper time. Be my little sugar and love me all the time.
On my heart imprint thine image, blessed Jesus, King of grace, that life's riches, cares, and pleasures have no power thee to efface. This the superscription be, Jesus crucified for me. Is my life, my hope's foundation, and